This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Historian and LBJ expert Julian Zelizer says Hollywood missed an opportunity with the movie Selma. Former Congressman Mike Barnes calls Vladimir Putin a KGB thug, but says he has lost his swagger. And Bill Press talks with Erica Sagrans, head of the group trying to draft Elizabeth Warren. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Princeton Professor Julian Zelizer is an expert on Lyndon Johnson and the Civil Rights Movement. But he's disappointed that Selma, which he thinks is a phenomenal movie, missed a chance to get history exactly right. And we say hello to Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University and the author of the book, The Fierce Urgency of Now, Lyndon Johnson, Congress, and the Battle for the Great Society. Julian Zelizer, thank you for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure to have you with us. In your book, you say that Lyndon Johnson spearheaded the most transformative agenda in American political history since the New Deal. For those who perhaps were not alive 50 years ago and who might remember LBJ only for the Vietnam War, what were his policy and political triumphs?
Yeah, the list of domestic policies during his presidency is pretty astounding. You had voting rights and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ended segregation in the South, the creation of Medicare and Medicaid, federal assistance to secondary and elementary education, as well as higher education loans, immigration reform, funding for the arts, open housing bill, and much, much more. So it's kind of not just a lot of legislation, but it's legislation that's lasted into our times. Also programs like Head Start and food stamps, which so many Americans have depended on.
It's amazing how none of that gets talked about when you're talking about LBJ. That's something. Now, we, of course, are commemorating the 50th anniversary of the March in Selma, Alabama for voting rights, and a number of historians and commentators are critical of the Oscar-nominated movie Selma for supposedly minimizing Johnson's role in achieving the Voting Rights Act. What's your view about that?
Well, overall, I think it's a really phenomenal movie that, in terms of capturing the voting rights protests, does it very effectively and really tells the story not just about how the organizing took place, but about how the marchers shaped Washington and put pressure on Congress to act before they were ready to act. I do think that the movie doesn't capture how committed Lyndon Johnson had become to the cause of voting rights by 1965, and how hard he was working behind the scenes to get this legislation through. And so it's really a moment when a president and a movement are working in complementary fashion, but I think the movie presents Johnson as somewhat indifferent or frustrated with voting rights, and at moments even hostile to it.
Yeah. Well, now, of course, on the other hand, one of those key players 50 years ago, Congressman John Lewis, he disagrees and says the movie has it pretty much right and calls it quibbling to criticize the movie as historically inaccurate. Would you say that, you got to let Hollywood be Hollywood? Is that fair to...
I mean, there's something to that, and I think Lewis in general is reacting to the bigger movie, meaning the bigger picture in the movie, which really is about the protests and really is about the importance of grassroots activism in this period. And I think there Lewis is correct, but I don't think it actually captures where the administration was. So in some ways, to get the presidency, not to get the presidency right is more than quibbling. And Hollywood definitely has a lot of leeway to present stories in the way they want, but they're going to open themselves up to this kind of criticism when you're dealing with something that comes off as a fictional portrayal of what actually happened.
Mm-hmm. Would you say they missed an opportunity, Hollywood?
They did. They did, because I think, one of the most interesting parts of the story is trying to understand how and why the president saw himself relatively aligned with a civil rights movement that was still pretty radical in most of the country. And, we go through so many periods, including today, when there seems to be a disconnect between where the White House is and where people at the grassroots level are, that this is really a different moment when, at least for a few years, Johnson saw himself as working in a partnership with Martin Luther King. So the movie could have actually explored that. There's plenty of drama on the streets of Selma to carry a film. And I think that in that respect, it's a missed opportunity. The positive thing is it's triggered this debate about presidents, about legislation, about the relationship of the grassroots to Washington that has been really helpful, actually. And it's a great contribution that the film has made to stimulate these kind of discussions, not just with adults, but even children.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk a little bit about the relationship. Isn't it true that LBJ not quite buddy-buddy with Martin Luther King, and there was some tension between them, especially in the later years when King turned so strongly against the war in Vietnam?
Yeah, there was tension. Let me start. Even during the debate over voting rights, there was a lot of tension over when the voting rights bill should come to Congress. Johnson was fearful in early '65 that if he moved too soon on a second civil rights bill, it wouldn't work and it would tie up the rest of the agenda, whereas King is really demanding that Congress and the president move early on voting rights. And that is really a big fight that Selma resolves in favor of King. By 1967, there are really much more intense and fundamental differences between the two. In April of '67 is when Martin Luther King makes a public speech opposing and criticizing the war in Vietnam, and that's when Johnson no longer feels that he has an ally in King, in the movement, but he's feeling this with many liberals who are starting to come out against him with regards to the war.
We're speaking with Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University, and he is the author of the book, The Fierce Urgency of Now, Lyndon Johnson, Congress, and the Battle for the Great Society. As a historian, do you believe that art ought to be as historically accurate as, say, a textbook? I mean, look at American Sniper. There are plenty of critics say that that's riddled with error.
Yeah, I mean, most Hollywood movies of major significance, this becomes an issue. It did with Oliver Stone's films. It even did with the movie on the Cuban Missile Crisis that Kevin Costner was in. I don't think actually Hollywood has to get it exactly right. I think producers and directors have room in ultimately what's a work in fiction to tell the story in the way they want. They can move around periods of time. They can get the chronology off. They can even invent things that happen which didn't really happen, to tell a story and to get a message through. That said, this is an age when many people get their history from movies or TV. There's not much more, and there's not much more learning. So I do think if a film portrays someone in a very different way than they actually were, it's also fair game to say they can be criticized and there can be a debate about how they did this.
That's the scary part of this, is that so many people rely on just television and movies to get their history, and that's just dangerous. You've taken issue with some elements of the movie, of course. You talked about. You recently wrote, though, that the debate has unfortunately become a political football. Was that the result of a campaign by Johnson aides to deny Selma recognition by the Academy Awards, and was that fair?
I think most of the people who raised questions about the portrayal of Johnson, whether they worked for Johnson, like Joe Califano or others, their main reaction was not about the movie and any awards. It was really about this presidency, which has been so contentious for decades. And many of them feel that in this case, this is one area where Johnson deserves more credit than the film is giving him. I do think there are some critics of the movie who went overboard, and I don't think it was a concerted campaign, but I think sometimes the criticism veered into dismissing the movie altogether because of how it portrayed Johnson. And I also think critics of the critics have sometimes gone too far by almost, arguing there was some kind of conspiracy against the movie as opposed to legitimate debates over how this president is portrayed. And like so many other things, it became very political how people talked about this movie rather than what the movie offers, which is not just a great account of the moment, but also a really useful debate we can have about these big issues about presidencies and grassroots organizing.
Okay. Julian Zelizer, professor of history and public affairs at Princeton University. The book, The Fierce Urgency of Now, Lyndon Johnson, Congress, and the Battle for the Great Society. Julian, thank you so much for your time with us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
Thanks for having me.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Former House Foreign Affairs Committee member Mike Barnes assesses Vladimir Putin and his diminishing role on the world stage. We'll hear about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Good news, people. The boom is back. Good times are here again, thanks to an economic boom generated by, of all things, bad times. Tens of millions of Americans have been knocked down and held down in recent years by the collapse of jobs and wages. This calamity has led to a second blow for millions of the same families, who now find themselves buried in overdue bills for credit card charges, student loans, and other consumer debt. But there's a bright silver lining in that dark financial cloud. Only it's not for the indebted families, but for a booming breed of finance hucksters known as consumer debt buyers. Believe it or not, in the warped world of high finance, there's gold in them thar hills of bad debt. Such miners of human misery as Encore Capital Group buy bales of unpaid bills from banks and other lenders, paying pennies on the dollar. Then they unleash packs of their hard-nosed, aggressive collectors on the families. If they still can't extract payment, the debt profiteers turn to their meanest dog, the courts. Debt firms routinely file thousands of lawsuits a day against financially devastated Americans. They know that most debtors can't understand the legal gibberish in the suits, can't afford a lawyer, and can't mount an effective defense against the corporate lawyers. So, some 95% of these lawsuits produce default judgments against hapless borrowers, meaning debt buyers can then confiscate the wages of borrowers or freeze their bank accounts. This is Jim Hightower saying this boom in vulture capitalism is disgusting. But worse, it's subsidized by us taxpayers. We pay for that judicial system, the judges, courtrooms, and endless rounds of hearings. Predatory debt corporations have perverted our so-called justice system into their own subsidiary for squeezing profits out of destitute debtors.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Former Congressman Mike Barnes takes a look at Russia and its leader, Vladimir Putin, and says President Obama has handled him brilliantly. And we say hello to former Congressman Mike Barnes of Maryland, chaired the subcommittee on Western Hemisphere Affairs and was a member of the Kissinger Commission on Central America. Subsequent to his congressional service, he has practiced law and served as president of the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence. He is currently a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Congressman Mike Barnes, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Yeah, great to be with you again. Thank you.
Yeah, no, always nice to have you with us as well. What do you make of what's going on in Russia right now, with Vladimir Putin seemingly on the defensive in terms of sanctions and falling oil prices?
Well, he's certainly on the defensive in terms of economic issues, no doubt about that, but it doesn't yet seem to have translated into a lot of loss of his popularity with the Russian people. although inevitably over time that will happen. We see that in our own country that as the economy gets worse, presidential popularity goes down, and as it gets better, it goes up. We're seeing that to some degree now with President Obama, as his numbers are improving somewhat. But he is on the defensive. He totally underestimated the damage that the sanctions might do to his economy, and he, I think, also didn't see it coming, and most people didn't see coming, the drop of more than 50% in oil prices. And they're 80% of their exports, the Russian export is oil and gas. So they've really been hammered by this, and it does put him on the defensive, and it really weakens his ability to, walk with his swagger around the world and say, I'm the guy who can solve all the problems, because he looks pretty weakened right now, no question.
Mm-hmm. Do you think he's a reckless threat to world peace, or is he more pragmatic than it might seem?
Well, I don't want to underestimate the threat that he poses by the actions he takes against his neighboring countries, which he doesn't regard as neighboring countries. He regards them as spheres of influence of Russia, and of course he's trying to essentially recreate the old Soviet Empire. But I don't think he's totally crazy. I don't think he wants to risk a shooting war with NATO, for example. I can't imagine that he really wants that, given the way he's gone about these things. He seems to take actions and then sort of look around and see how everybody is responding. I think he has been surprised, as I said, by the extent of the effect of the sanctions that the United States and the European Union have imposed on him, on he and his cronies and the companies that they represent. But I don't see him trying to set off some kind of conflagration here. He seems to be more pragmatic than that. Certainly, we hope so. He's a thug, though, really, and we need to, I think, be very aware of what we're dealing with here. He's a KGB thug who, doesn't have any hesitation about using some force where he thinks he can get what he wants with by sending his guys in there and saying, "Oh, we're not sending anybody in there. They're not Russians. They're just local volunteers."
Right. Look at the clothing they're wearing. That's not Russian.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they're not. I don't know who these people are. I mean, he's a piece of work. He's a thug, and we need to be very conscious of what we're dealing with. And I think President Obama and the way he's handled this has really been quite brilliant. He's been very strong and very tough throughout. He keeps offering Putin, as Obama puts it, an off ramp. He said several times, we're giving him an off ramp. We keep telling him, you don't have to go down this road of isolating yourselves and getting your economy further damaged. You can get out of this. And Merkel and Hollande and others, Cameron, have been very supportive of the president's approach here. And I think it was absolutely the right approach. And we'll see how it all plays out here. But at the moment, it looks like Obama has won this thing in terms of the way the world sees it. And ultimately, we may see some very significant changes on the ground. I sure hope so.
Do you think U.S. policy toward Russia should be aggressive, countering every move by Putin, or should it be more relaxed? I mean, right now, where do you think we should, or perhaps more aggressive, less? What should we be doing? I think
it's been just about right. I think Obama has read this correctly. He knew what he was dealing with. He hasn't been naive. I mean, you remember President Bush said he looked into Putin's eyes and he saw his soul and he knew that this was a good man. Well, Obama never was naive about what he was dealing with here. He hoped that it could be a more constructive relationship than it's been, but he wasn't kidding himself about it. And he's found areas where there have been mutual interests and where we've been able to get some things done with them. But the cancellation of the pipeline that Putin wanted to build over into Europe to make Europe even more dependent on Russian natural gas is a real indication of the problems that have been caused here by the sanctions and what Putin is having to deal with.
We're speaking with former Maryland Congressman Mike Barnes, currently a senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Can Putin be of any diplomatic use to the United States in terms of Iran, Syria, perhaps ISIS? And then is ISIS actually a threat to Russia?
Well, ISIS is a threat to Russia. Russia has a very large Muslim population, and they're very worried about the internal dynamics of the uprising by ISIS and other terrorist groups. And they've cracked down. They've had their own internal, very significant problems, much worse than anything we've experienced, other than our 9/11 tragedy. There's certainly the opportunity there for some cooperation, and there is the opportunity. We haven't seen it tangibly yet very much. But on both Iran and Syria, the two ones you asked about, there are some mutual interests there between the West and Russia, and Putin has been fairly pragmatic in the way he's couched his approach on those issues. He's very critical of the West, but yet he leaves the door open to working together where it makes sense.
Mm-hmm. If somehow or another Putin was no longer in power, who or what could we expect to see in his place, you think?
Well, the KGB crowd that he leads and is so powerful today in Russia is not going away. And so, just his departure, I don't think should give us a lot of hope that everything overnight was going to be hunky-dory. It's a kleptocracy. They're all getting filthy rich, and if you play the game according to Putin and the crowd around him, things can go very well for you and your business. So that's not, if he were to get hit by a bus tomorrow and taken from the scene, I don't think that we'd overnight see, a Western-style democratic government spring up. I think that's unlikely. I wish I could say otherwise. But there are elements within Russia that very much regret that after the fall of the Soviet Union, we ended up where we are today with this kind of really dictatorship in Russia again. I mean, he's theoretically elected, but in fact, it's a very repressive dictatorship in Russia today, and we need to be cognizant of that. And I don't have any question that President Obama and the leaders in Europe are very cognizant of it.
Okay. Former Maryland Congressman Mike Barnes, currently senior fellow at the Center for International Policy, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. As always, Congressman Barnes, thank you so much for your time with us, and we look forward to doing it again soon.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much.
Take care. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now, Bill Press and his guest, Erica Sagrans, who is trying to get Elizabeth Warren to run.
Been around for a long time, a couple of years now, ready for Hillary, that big PAC. well, why leave the field to Hillary alone? Why not Ready for Elizabeth or Ready for Warren? There is such a group, Ready for Warren, based in Chicago. Erica Sagrans is their executive or campaign manager and joins us on our newsline from a sub-zero Chicago this morning. Hi, Erica.
Hi, thanks for having me today.
Stay warm. Right.
Yeah, it's a little chilly here.
How long has Ready for Warren been in existence?
Well, we kicked off officially this last summer in July, and have been going since then. It's been we've been just picking up momentum these past months and seeing a lot of excitement around this idea that Warren run.
So I guess the question is, what kind of response are you getting around the country, number one, and then maybe more importantly, what kind of response are you getting from the candidate? Let's start with around the country.
Sure. Well, I'm in Chicago. We have folks all around the country. We're a very volunteer-driven group, and I've spent a lot of time in Iowa over the past few months in the summer, too, and we've just seen a lot of interest in Warren, a lot of excitement about her. People actually do know about her. Many of them have read her book. I was at the Harkin Steak Fry, and people just came up to us sort of so excited about her story, asking us when we were going to open offices. So we've seen a lot of excitement, a lot of interest. You may have read about there was a focus group in Colorado a few months ago too, when people just really knew her, felt like they could trust her, and wanted her to run, wanted her, to be more of a leader and a candidate. In terms of her position, she's obviously said she's not running, and we take her at her word. But that's why we exist as a draft push to encourage her to run. She was really drafted to run when she ran for Senate in 2012 in Massachusetts, and so we believe we can do it again here.
That's one of the things I wanted to bring up, is you mentioned all the excitement around Elizabeth Warren. There's more excitement around Elizabeth Warren than anybody on either side of the ticket for 2016. The one person least excited about it seems to be Elizabeth Warren. So,
well,
what have you heard from her? Because I know she knows about you.
She does know about us. I mean, she's focused. She's focused on doing what she's doing, and she's doing great work and leading the fight there in Washington. But we know she's listening and knows what we're up to, and so we feel like if we can really show her that support exists, she'll think about it and hopefully run.
Do you? There was this meeting between Hillary and Elizabeth Warren, which happened in December and then sort of leaked out. So did she? I'm speaking about Elizabeth Warren now. I hope the answer is no. But did she tell Hillary she would never run against her?
I don't believe so. I mean, I don't know what happened in the meeting. Our take on that meeting is just that it shows what a leader Elizabeth Warren is becoming, and that that she's clearly a leading voice on issues around economic inequality and just sort of so many things. But I don't believe she said that as far as what I've heard.
So you're very, very clear that you want Elizabeth Warren to run for president, but if one of the byproducts of that meeting with Hillary Clinton is that Elizabeth Warren maybe runs as vice president, how does that make you feel?
I mean, I think whatever Warren ends up deciding, we see her as a leader, a rising leader in the Democratic Party, in politics, just, the way that she speaks about, giving working families a fighting chance and helping students, and just the fight that she's led has really resonated with so many people. So regardless of what she does, we want her to continue to be a leader and elevate her and, the work that she's fighting on. So that's my take on that.
Erica, I got to tell you, I feel very, very strongly that Elizabeth Warren should run for president. I want her to run for president. I want Bernie Sanders to run for president as well. I do not want Hillary Clinton to have a free ride all the way to the nomination for a lot of reasons. Nothing against Hillary, but I just don't think it's good for the party, good for the country. I don't think it's good for Hillary. So what can those of us, and I've personally talked to Bernie Sanders about this a couple of times and encouraged him to run. On the air, we have been encouraging Elizabeth Warren to run. What can we do to build a fire under this lady? Because ultimately, as great as she is, and she's phenomenal on the issues. She's a great, great leader. But she's got to want it. She's got to put herself out there. And if she doesn't, we're screwed. So what can we do to change our mind?
Yeah, I mean, that's so much of what we've been saying, too, at Ready for Warren, is just the importance of seeing a contested primary. Democratic voters really need a choice, and that's going to be better for the party and voters and the country and the eventual nominee, too, regardless of who that is. So I think just continuing to talk about it, I think the idea of there not being a contested primary, it scares a lot of people, even people, regardless of who they support. So I think that idea is something that people will really support. And I think with Warren, part of our strategy is we want to get the voices of people around the country, their personal stories in front of her and to her. We have people recording videos, talking about why they need her to run and their struggles. And, that's something she wrote about in her book, is being asked to run by a woman at a Massachusetts house party. And, this woman said, "Will you fight for us in Washington?" And that's when she says that she made her decision. So we do want to show her that it's not just kind of politico or activist types. It's real people. So I think kind of just highlighting those stories, just continuing to encourage her and encourage others as well, because we want Warren to run, but I think others should run as well, and it should just be definitely make sure it's a competitive primary.
Erica Sagrans, our guest, she is campaign manager for Ready for Warren. So how can people plug in, Erica?
Yeah, you can check out readyforwarren.com. The easiest thing is to just sign up and say you want to see Warren run, and then you can get some updates from us. We have often events around the country. We're pretty active on social media as well, at Ready for Warren on Facebook, and check us out there and get plugged in.
Have you done any polling in the Democratic primary states?
Yeah, actually, Move On, who joined the Draft Warren effort, along with Democracy for America and also the Working Families Party of New York, Move On recently conducted a poll focused on New Hampshire and Iowa, and they found very strong support for Warren, also just overwhelming support for wanting a competitive primary.
So there you go. We got the base. We just need to, I think we've got the foundation. What we need is a candidate, right?
Yes, we're building, we're organizing, and showing her there's that support there, and we'll be ready if she decides to jump in the race.
Have you personally met with her?
I have not. I mean, we've been at plenty of events where she has been there, but we've been mostly just kind of there to show our support.
Okay, I didn't know whether you had actually had a chance to sit down and and look her in the eye and say, "Come on, do this." Right. All right. Well, we hope you have that opportunity, and I'm so excited that you're out there. So excited for what you're doing, and hopefully we can help get you,
keep it going.
Some more soldiers.
Thank you so much for the support. I mean, we've seen so much interest and enthusiasm everywhere. So we're ready, and we're encouraging her, and we'll see what we can do.
All right.
Nice.
So let's build a fire under Elizabeth Warren. Go to readyforwarren.com. Erica Sagrans, campaign manager.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Julian Zelizer, Mike Barnes, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.